Hello and welcome to Mystery Us. I'm Tony Pratt, your host for Mystery Us. And on today's edition of Mystery Us, we have an honored guest who is a renowned expert in uncovering archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity and alternative theories of human origins. He is principal author of the controversial book Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race. And his latest book is Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. Welcome to Mystery Us, author, researcher, science historian, and philosopher, Dr. Michael Cremo.
Well, thank you, Tony. Really happy to be here with all your viewers.
Great. Now, Michael, you do live in a world of controversy at times, but you do get you speak to a lot of different type of groups: archaeological, religious groups, UFO type alternative science groups. What is the common thread that connects all those groups?
I think it's the idea of knowledge filtration.
Knowledge filtration.
The idea that we're not getting the entire truth from our educators, from our politicians, from all kinds of people in authority.
Now, Michael, your work is inspired by your studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings, or Vedas, and they speak of ancient civilizations, vimanas, spacecraft, extraterrestrial forms of life, and ancient ape men with mystic powers and human-like intelligence. Sounds like the paranormal world of today. One of these ape men, Anuman, is named in the writings, in the story, and your research findings have led you to conclude that modern Homo sapiens are continuous contemporaries of evolution of ape-like creatures from whom evolutionary biologists usually trace human descent or bifurcation, thus confirming the Vedas that claim a nearly endless antiquity of the human race. Have these ape-like creatures continued as our contemporaries? Are they the same thing as Bigfoot?
That's a very good question. I think you could make a very good argument for that. What the actual evidence shows is that, yes, in the past, ape men existed. I'm not arguing about that. But I would say it isn't that European scientists of the 19th century, like Charles Darwin, were the first to talk about ape men and missing links and things like that. Thousands of years before that, the authors of these ancient Sanskrit writings were speaking about such things. But the basic picture that emerges when we look at all the evidence is one of coexistence, not evolution. Human beings like ourselves were coexisting with these ape-man creatures that scientists now call Australopithecus and Homo erectus and so many other technical names. And as for your question, are perhaps living representatives of these ancient ape men still with us? I would say the answer to that is yes, because in various parts of the world, you do get reports from scientists and others who have observed or found other kinds of evidence for beings that they call, in this country, Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that they call Himalayan snowman, or in Central Asia,
Yeti,
they call the Yeti or the Almas, and things like that.
Right, yeah, there's all kinds of names for Bigfoot. In fact, chapter 11 of your book goes through several of the reports, and these are reports from, most of these are from scientists. I mean, most of the research that you have in your books actually comes from mainstream science.
Yes, that's actually a fact. There was a paleontologist working in North America, and he found what he regarded as convincing evidence for the existence of Bigfoot. He said these footprints cannot have been faked. They were biologically convincing. And we find evidence from other parts of the world. For example, the British anthropologist Myra Shackley wrote a book on what she considered to be evidence for living Neanderthals in Central Asia and other parts of the world. So it's not that these reports are just coming from ordinary people, although I don't discount the reports coming from ordinary people,
Right.
but they are also coming from professional scientists.
Right. Now, you claim in a lot of the evidence you present that many of these cases have never been resolved, but simply forgotten through the process you described as knowledge filtration, because they don't fit into the Darwinian linear evolutionary model. So Neanderthal or Bigfoot, those wouldn't really fill in that gap of the missing link that scientists have been looking for so long. What's this whole missing link theory?
Well, they believe that originally life began on Earth about 2 billion years ago with some tiny one-celled, single-celled organism, and that over the course of many, many millions of years you get various kinds of animals coming into existence. About 40 million years ago you get the first apes and monkeys, according to this theory. About 6 million years ago you get the first ape men, and then finally they would say humans like us came into existence about 100,000 years ago. So they think they have the basic outline, and they're just looking to fill in the missing links. They believe they have the basic chain of the history of life, but they're just trying to fill in the missing pieces, the so-called missing links. However, what I would say is that if you carefully study all of the evidence, you'll see that you don't have a chain in which there are missing links. Rather, you've got coexistence going on. You don't have ape men coming from monkeys. You don't have humans coming from ape men. Rather, you've got a picture of coexistence where apes and monkeys were existing, ape men of various kinds were existing, and humans like ourselves were also existing many, many millions of years ago, as far back in time as we can actually trace it. And this is something that I uncovered when I did 8 years of research into the entire history of archaeology, because you're not going to see a lot of this evidence for a very ancient human presence in the current textbooks.
Right.
You have to go back to the original scientific literature in many different languages from all over the world to get at this. So that's what I did. And as I said, what you don't find that there's just a single chain of life where there's some missing links. Rather, you find there's lots of parallel chains of life, parallel lines going back.
And a lot of your harshest critics, like Richard Leakey, you actually use a lot of the evidence and statements from their reports where they have made discoveries and said, you know, this is just like a modern human, but they just kind of forgot that they said that or noted that.
Yes, well, for example, Richard Leakey in the 1970s, he found a human thigh bone or femur in Africa.
Right.
And he said, he noticed this is exactly like a modern human femur. And he said that in his scientific reports, exactly, you cannot find any difference.
Yeah.
But he didn't say it belonged to a human being. He imagined, well, there must have been some kind of ape man that had a thigh bone just like a modern human being, although nothing has ever been found like that.
Right.
So, and that thigh bone was about 2 million years old, which is far older than they now think modern human beings are. Actually, Richard Leakey's mother, Mary Leakey, who is in her own right a pretty famous archaeologist, found footprints at a place called LAETOLI in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. And in her original report in National Geographic magazine, she said those footprints are exactly like modern human footprints. They're indistinguishable from modern human footprints. Other scientists also agreed. But they were found in layers of rock that are 3,700,000 years old. So they thought, well, it couldn't be human beings like us. So they imagined, well, there must have been some kind of ape man who had feet exactly like modern human feet, which is an interesting idea, but actually There's no scientific evidence to support that. We have skeletons of the ape men that existed at that time. They're called Australopithecus, and their foot is very ape-like. Actually, the only creature known to science today that has a foot just like a modern human foot is a human being like us.
Right.
So what did Mary Leakey actually find? I think she found evidence that humans like us were existing almost 4 million years ago in Africa.
But Darwin's theory is just so pervasive, or it's just been accepted as scientific fact.
Well, actually, most people don't accept the
Or theory, yeah.
And actually, here in the United States, only about 10% of the American people actually accept the Darwinian theory of evolution as it's taught by the scientists. About 50 to 60% of the people believe that God created humans in the beginning just as they are now. And then there's about 30% who believe that God created humans by evolution, by guiding the process, which the scientists don't accept. They don't see it. They don't think there was any guidance at all. They think it was just an accidental process. And they would say it could just as well have been cockroaches ruling the world, rather than human beings. So I would say if you just left it to the people, the theory of evolution wouldn't be taught in the schools. Now, what we've got in this country is a situation where a few federal judges, in response to lawsuits made by the evolutionists, have imposed their beliefs on the American people. If it was just up to the American people and what they believed is true, evolution wouldn't be taught in the schools.
Now, you have some support from the creationist side because of the fact that you do believe in a creator or a designer, an intelligent design, but you also propose the theory that there may be some intermediary beings or advanced beings, as Paul von Word would say, like angels or spirits or some kind of higher self that's connected to humans that does guide us towards advancement.
Yes, and I think this idea of intermediaries between some supreme intelligent being and humans as we know them is part of every great spiritual tradition in the world. I mean,
every religion.
You mentioned the angels of the biblical tradition. And today many people have a very Hollywood idea of what angels are, just beings who are playing harps somewhere. But if you go back to the original Christian literature from the early church fathers, you see that angels had quite a controlling role, controlling various forces of nature and interacting with human beings in many different ways, one of which is giving messages from these higher sources. And it's something we find in Native American Indian traditions, the idea of intermediate beings. We find it in practically every religious tradition in the world. So yes, I do accept that as well.
Now, if people want to get your books, they can go to Amazon.com or go to your website.
Yeah, the books are pretty widely available.
mcremo.com or pretty much any bookstore. Most bookstores have your books.
If they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it for people. But the books are pretty widely available, yes.
Okay, so rather than evolution, your latest book talks about devolution. Now, what is the process of devolution? Can you explain that?
Well, after I wrote my first book, Forbidden Archaeology, which is also available in this abridged popular edition called The Hidden History of the Human Race, people started asking, well, if you've got all this archaeological evidence that shows human beings have been here for millions and millions of years, that we didn't evolve from the apes, then where do you think human beings came from?
Right.
And my book, Human Devolution, was my answer to that question. And what I propose there, to put it in very, very simple terms, is that we did not evolve up from matter, as most scientists now believe. Rather, we devolved or came down from some level of pure consciousness or spirit, if you like that word. And in that sense, we could say that originally we existed as beings of pure consciousness, and we've become covered by matter. That's what the problem is. Not that our consciousness and feelings of love and thoughts of the divine have just come about because chemicals combine together in a certain way in the brain. I don't believe that. And I think there's a lot of evidence for a conscious self that can exist apart from the body. You've got, for example, medical studies of out-of-body experiences. You know, there are times when a person should be completely unconscious, as during a heart attack. The heart stops beating, blood stops flowing to the brain. Medical instruments show that the brain waves stop. Person in that state should be completely unconscious, but many people in that condition report separating from their bodies, looking down and seeing what the doctors and nurses are doing to them. And there was an American heart surgeon named Michael Cremo. He heard some of these reports and he wondered, well, these people, are they telling the truth or are they just making up stories?
Right.
So he took a group of about 25 of these heart attack patients who had reported these experiences, and he carefully interviewed each one of them and asked them, tell me everything you can remember about what you saw the doctors doing. Then he went to the physicians who had treated them and asked to see their detailed medical records, which the patients don't see, and he found the stories matched exactly.
Right.
So you've got a lot of evidence that there is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body. But this is not what we're being taught in our schools today. We're being taught, no, consciousness is just chemicals operating in the brain. There's no conscious self or soul, if you want to use that word, that can exist.
But this is what all the major religions have taught forever, that our real essence, our spirit, our soul is just within the body and separates at death.
Yes, that's, I think that traditional wisdom reflects the truth more accurately than our modern so-called scientific knowledge.
Right.
And I think that's what's very important to get across to intelligent people who are thinking about these things. Now, there are a lot of people who just accept these things on faith, which I think is wonderful. But what I've tried to do in my work is give some people who may not be able right now to accept these things on faith some scientific and philosophical reasons to think, well, yeah, this is the best explanation.
Right.
And, you know, I mentioned this evidence for out-of-body experiences, these near-death experiences. I think there's another category of evidence, which some people believe, some people don't. But this idea that a conscious self can temporarily separate from the body and then re-enter the same body leads to another idea, namely that that conscious self can separate from one body and then enter another body, which would be the idea of reincarnation. And there is some scientific evidence that supports that idea. It comes from psychiatric studies of past life memories. For example, Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia Medical School and his colleagues carried out thousands of studies of past life memories reported by young children. And in over 800 of those cases, they were able to verify the existence of the person the child claimed had been in the past life. So I think there's a lot of evidence that we really didn't evolve up from matter, rather we have devolved or come down from this position of pure consciousness or spirit, and we become covered by matter. That's what the real truth is. But I think it's a process that can be reversed. Yeah,
so we're multidimensional, multi-level beings. We're existing on more than one level at the same time. We're bigger, we're more than just animals.
Absolutely right. I think we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And this is something, again, that's part of the great spiritual traditions of the world, that we live in a multi-level cosmos. Right now, we're in the level that's dominated by ordinary matter. It's, you know, it's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there. That's where we find ourselves now. But I think beyond that, there's a more subtle realm, you know, a realm dominated by the the mind element. It's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there, and people will call them angels, they'll call them astral beings, gods, goddesses. They have different names for them in different cultures. But it's the same idea. And then I think beyond that, there's the ultimate level of pure consciousness where there's a source of all conscious beings that people could call God, if you will. But I prefer, in terms of a scientific and philosophical discussion, to use the term source of all conscious beings. And I think ultimately that's what we're meant, that's where we began, that's where we started out. Living in harmony with the source of all conscious beings, living in harmony with all other conscious beings, and we're meant to go back to that original position.
Now back to the archaeological evidence, you have a ton of amazing cases. I remember I asked you you were on a radio show, Paranormality, that my viewers are familiar with, and I had asked you, you know, what is the most striking or impressive example of, you know, evidence for the ancient antiquity of man, but there's just a lot of them. There's hundreds and hundreds of cases that you have in your book, and one of the ones that struck me as amazing was how many cases of objects like that have been found in coal, embedded in coal, like there's a gold necklace, hieroglyphics, a polished stone wall, a human skeleton perfectly preserved in solid coal, which that's got to be sediment that's going back millions of years, right?
Yes, that last case you mentioned, for example, that's from a scientific journal called The Geologist, which in 1862 published a really interesting report. A human skeleton was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois. And according to the report, above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that just extended for hundreds of yards in all directions. And that layer of slate rock was unbroken. That's an important detail because it means the skeleton cannot have come down from some higher, more recent level, which is what skeptics of various kinds will say. So, so that thick, unbroken layer of solid rock rules out that possibility. That means the skeleton has to be as old as the layer of rock in which it was found. Now, we inquired from the geologist of the state of Illinois, the state geology department, how old is that layer there beneath the slate rock at a depth of 90 feet at that location? And they said over 300 million years, which is before the time of the dinosaurs even. But there was another interesting case. Now, the case of the skeleton was from a professional scientific journal. But, you know, if this evidence really is there, then I think ordinary people must also be finding it. And their reports might not be in scientific journals. They might be found in ordinary newspapers. So there was a case in 1892 where in the town of Morrisonville, Illinois, there was a newspaper there, the Morrisonville Times, told of how a woman in that city, in that town in Illinois, a Mrs. Robert Culp, was putting some coal into her coal-burning stove, and it was a big piece of coal, and she broke it in half to make it fit inside, and inside she found a gold chain 10 inches long. And it was obvious that that chain was solidly embedded in the coal. It wasn't just some chain that had accidentally fallen into her coal pot or something like that, because both pieces of the broken piece of coal were hanging off the ends of the chain. Now, from the newspaper report, we could tell what mine that the coal came from. And again, we inquired from the geologist of the state of Illinois, well, how old is the coal from that mine? We didn't tell them what had been found there because sometimes that tips them off. And they, they won't answer the letter. But they said, well, that again is about 300 million years old, which is about the same age as the skeleton, the human skeleton found in the same state. Now, you also mentioned a case from Heavener, Oklahoma, where some miners early in the 20th century had gone about 2 miles deep, and they were using dynamite to do what they call blast a room out. That means they would use dynamite to clear, you know, a chamber in the coal, and then they would take out the coal and send it up. So as one of the miners was clearing out this chamber, he came to a wall, a solid wall made of 6-foot cubes of polished stone. He said it was so polished you could see your face in it.
Mm-hmm.
He said when this was reported to the mining officials, they closed down the mine, brought up all the workers, and sent them off somewhere else to work. Which is, I mean, you can understand why they would do that, because it happens today. You know, if you find something, you know, if you're a developer or making a road, it's the law now that if you encounter some human remains, you got to call in some archaeologists, and you got to pay them to do studies, you know, to show, you know, that you're not going to impact anything.
Okay, Michael.
So, yes.
We're almost at the end of our time. I really appreciate you being our guest today on Mystery Us, and we want to get you back for some more shows. And thank you for being our guest.
Really happy to be here on Mystery Us.